Thank you, Karen, for that masterful job. We're launching a new scholarship again this year. It's named for Richard Pyle, whose job at the AP was his life. He spent almost 50 years at the Associated Press. He was best known for his work in Vietnam, and Edie Lederer will tell you more about that in a moment. I knew him in Tokyo at the Foreign Correspondents Club and back in New York when he was transferred home. He was a friend. With Edie today is Brenda Smiley, who was Richard's wife. And the winner of the first Richard Pyle Fellowship is A.J. Naddaff of Davidson College, who wrote about how a Palestinian refugee in Syria rebelled against social and family norms to become a dancer with the Dutch National Ballet. A French and Arabic speaker, we're sending A.J. to the AP Bureau in Beirut, where I predict he will start a glorious career befitting of Richard Pyle. Edie.
Thank you very much. It is indeed a great pleasure to be here to talk about Richard Pyle, who was my boss in Saigon when I arrived to cover my first war in Vietnam in 1972. He traveled the globe in a distinguished career with the Associated Press that spanned a half-century. Richard had a nose for news and being in the right place at the right time. He was with President John F. Kennedy when Kennedy learned of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He covered revolution in the Philippines, the Iran-Iraq conflict, the war in Lebanon, and the first Gulf War. He watched the 9/11 terrorist attack that toppled the World Trade Center's Twin Towers and ran over the Brooklyn Bridge to report it. And at age 75, he dashed to the shoreline to report on the rescue of all passengers from the splash landing of the jet in the Hudson River. But for Richard, his proudest moments were covering the Vietnam War from 1968 to 1973, the last 3 years as chief of AP's Pulitzer Prize-winning Saigon Bureau. Richard was a brilliant wordsmith who never lost his passion for pursuing important stories and the truth. He helped write that first draft of history of many major events of the 20th century. And now it is my great pleasure and honor to ask his beloved wife, Brenda, to present the first Richard Pyle Overseas Press Club Scholarship to Alfred Naddaff.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you a brief anecdote from my past summer reporting experience in Kosovo on ISIS, thanks to the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. What I learned from that experience is that pushing through fear sometimes creates the best stories. So what I learned from that experience is sometimes pushing through fear creates the best stories. When I arrived in my Airbnb in May, and I'm sure a lot of you have felt this way too, I didn't know the language and I was jet-lagged and overwhelmed. How in the world am I going to possibly tell the stories that I've outlined in my proposal? And for a topic as underground and convoluted as Islamic extremism, I felt even more engulfed by my own insecurities. But I found that I was ultimately able to push through those insecurities because there were stories to uncover. Invariably, in chasing stories, we're forced to make tough decisions about where do we go, whose narratives can we rely on, what are the various agendas of certain people. And sometimes a very relevant question is, at what point am I putting my own life at risk? So after several weeks of networking, I ultimately decided to interview Fitzum Ledrovsky, a returning jihadist who spent 1 year with the Islamic State in Syria. and he had brought back an 8-year-old child with him from Syria and had just finished 3 years of a mitigated prison sentence and was one of the few returnees released into Kosovo society. And obviously meeting him reaffirmed some of the biases we all have towards jihadists, that he had an abominable ideology that poses a great threat to our world. But there was also something perplexingly humane about that interaction, like how he wanted to buy my coffee. And also, he believed in journalism too. That's why he was meeting me. So I was trying to wrap my head around that. And that's something we aren't hearing as often from some of our leaders. So does he speak for every individual who joined ISIS? Certainly not. But this interaction, this interview, added value to my understanding of this complex issue. And in conclusion, what started out as a feeling of isolation ended in a feeling of connectedness, a sense of recognizing the multiple layers of narratives. And I left with more clarity on how to make journalistic decisions moving forward. With a greater story and with a stronger yearning to report now more than ever before. So it's certainly a memory that I'll try and keep with me as I move forward into Beirut this summer. And I wanted to say also that I'm just so honored to have received the Richard Pyle Award, because from everything that I've heard, he was such a remarkable man. And if I can just have, an ounce of his drive for truth, accuracy, and fairness, and if I can keep that at the forefront of my mind, and if we all can, aspiring and current journalists in here, I think that's all we can ask for living a good life. Thank you.